Hey there, my name is Emily Roseman. I am an independent researcher, and today I'm going to talk about findings out of the Solution Journalism Network's New England Local News Ecosystem Study, which was funded by the Barr Foundation. So a quick disclaimer that the research was mainly collected prior to the COVID outbreak, so you'll get a sense of that in our findings. And also a quick shout out to the full research team, which you'll see pictured in a second in a Vermont co-working space. Doesn't that look so fun? So that's me on the far right. To my right is Rachel Edens, who is the other researcher on the project. And to Rachel's right is Leah Todd, who is the SJN New England Region Manager. And the three of us set out to answer this question. What issue areas are most relevant to New England communities today, and which are relevant across the region at large? And so before we get into that, a flashback to this time last year at Stephanie Murray's Ignite talk, where she focused on City Bureau's information needs work, which I am now also fully obsessed with. And she gets to this thesis that journalism is not currently meeting the critical information needs of our communities. And both she and the City Bureau people bring us to Maslow's hierarchy of needs to hammer home this point that most of the journalism we see today is not addressing those safety and psychological needs that people need to kind of work up the pyramid. So I felt this firsthand just growing up in a more rural area in Massachusetts called Rochester, Massachusetts, where I just didn't connect with some of the dominant media narratives coming out of places like Boston or Providence. And so I was excited to see this all pan out in real time. And so the first thing we did was we chose 8 communities to really dig deep on in our research, and you can see the criteria focused on in the bottom left corner. And we set off on a very ambitious data collection process across the region. This was very fun. Rachel and Leah hosted a focus group in each of the 8 areas I mentioned previously, and the team also collected over 200 survey responses, and we did ground source SMS exchanges. It was a lot of fun. And encouragingly, we found that half of all survey respondents said that their local news in New England was regularly relevant and useful. However, we did also find a few major issues of local concern. So these you can take as the major information needs in New England: economy and jobs, housing, and education. And on the next slide, you'll see a few qualitative snippets we collected in focus groups that show how these 3 information needs are interconnected. People were telling us my housing options are directly connected to my education options, which are connected to the jobs that are available to me. And so we also mapped out the information needs across each of our 8 areas to see how frequently they were mentioned. And I'm sure your eye is drawn to that housing column, where 7 out of 8 of our communities mentioned housing as a major concern. And this is so interesting because the FCC currently doesn't recognize housing as a community information need. So we think this might be a New England specific finding. Another major, perhaps New England specific finding is when we asked people about local issues, the environment was number 6. But when we flipped the question and asked about regional issues, it skyrocketed to number 2. So that's interesting. And people told us about how they want stories to be covered, not just what they wanted covered. So this kind of all bolsters SJN's main point that we need to cover solutions to problems and not just the problems themselves. And here are a few examples that I pulled from SJN's story tracker all around housing and homelessness to show how this is kind of done in practice. And okay, I'm going to conclude with a kind of existential crazy thought here, but ProPublica analyzed this climate change data recently, and it was pretty terrifying. And it showed these maps of where like the ideal region will be to live in 2070. And anyway, I noticed New England is a suitable region. So my hunch is that housing issues in New England are just going to get a heck of a lot worse in the upcoming decades. So how can we provide information on these critical needs now? I have a few ideas just based on what I'm seeing in the field more generally. There's a lot of great work on regional-wide collaborations already. Perhaps there's a need for some dedicated beats at newsrooms to housing and homelessness, or maybe we need a whole single topic newsroom on housing in New England. These are some crazy ideas, so if you have feedback or thoughts, please email me, and thank you so much for watching.